Before the sun even thought about rising, while the village still slept under a blanket of stars and silence, he was already awake. His stomach growled, not the loud, angry kind, but the quiet, hollow ache that had become familiar over the past few weeks. He lay still on his thin mat, listening to the soft breathing from the next room, his daughter. She was coughing again, just a little but enough to make his chest tighten. He got up slowly, careful not to make noise. The floor was cold under his bare feet. Outside, the air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. He filled a small pot with water from the clay pitcher, lit the kerosene stove and waited for it to warm. Not boil, just warm enough to soothe his throat and trick his body into thinking it was being fed. He stirred in a spoonful of sugar, no milk, and sipped it slowly, like it was something precious. Maybe it was. He hadn't eaten a proper meal in 3 days, not because there was no food, but because what little he had he saved for her. She needed it more. She was studying for her final exams, staying up late with books open under the flickering light of their single kerosene lamp. Her eyes were tired, but her mind was sharp, sharper than anyone in the village had ever seen. Teachers said she could go far, maybe even to the city, maybe even to college. He smiled at the thought, though his ribs pressed against his skin like they were trying to escape. He used to work at the brick kiln, but the owner shut it down last month. Now he took whatever came, loading sacks at the grain market, digging trenches for new pipes, sometimes sweeping floors at the small tea stall near the bus stop. The pay was never enough, but it was something. And lately something had to stretch even further. The school had sent a notice. Fees had gone up. Not by a little, by almost double. Infrastructure development, the paper said. He didn't know what that meant, but he knew what it cost. 2,800 rupees by the end of the week, or his daughter would be asked to stay home. He counted his savings that night, hidden in an old biscuit tin under his cot. 20 rupees. He'd been saving for months, putting aside 5 rupees here, 10 there, whenever he could. But it wasn't enough. Not even close, so he made a decision. No one saw it happen. No one heard him say it out loud. But from that day on, he stopped eating lunch. Then dinner. Then breakfast too, most mornings. He'd leave the house before sunrise with a small cloth bundle, just a dry roti wrapped in newspaper, and tell his daughter he'd eaten at the work site. Sometimes he'd chew on neem leaves to kill the hunger pangs. Other times he'd drink salt water. It made him dizzy, but it filled his stomach, if only for a while. At the construction site, the foreman noticed he was slower than usual. "You sick?" he asked once, squinting in the midday heat. No, he replied, wiping sweat from his brow with a ragged sleeve. Just didn't sleep well. He carried bricks on his head one after another up narrow wooden planks. Each step made his knees tremble, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Every brick meant 2 rupees. Every hour meant 50. And every rupee brought him closer to that number, 2,800. Back home, his daughter never suspected a thing. She'd greet him with a bright smile, show him her math homework, ask if he'd seen the new science chart she'd drawn. He'd nod, praise her, and gently push the plate of rice and dal toward her. "You eat," he'd say. "I had plenty at work," she believed him. Why wouldn't she? He was her father, strong, steady, always there. But at night, when she was asleep, he'd sit outside under the neem tree, massaging his temples, trying to quiet the gnawing in his gut. Sometimes he'd watch the moon and think about his wife. Gone 5 years now. She'd loved their daughter fiercely. Would she be proud? He hoped so. He hoped she could see them from wherever she was. One evening, his daughter came out with a glass of water. "Papa, you're sitting out here again," she said softly. "Just enjoying the air," he said, forcing a smile. She sat beside him, silent for a moment. "Then you've been thinner lately." His heart skipped. "Nonsense," he said, ruffling her hair. "I'm fine. Strong as a bull." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't press. Instead, she leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm going to top the class this term," she whispered. "I promise," he swallowed hard. "I know you will." The next morning, he walked 6 kilometers to a new worksite on the edge of town. His legs ached and his vision blurred once or twice, but he kept going. By noon, he'd earned 120 rupees. That night, he added it to the tin. Fund of 450 rupees. Still short, but closer. He started skipping water too, not all of it, just enough to save a few coins. He reused his old slippers until the sole came off, then tied them back with string. He stopped buying tea, even the cheapest kind. Every sacrifice was quiet and visible to everyone but him. And then one afternoon it happened. He was carrying a heavy sack of cement when his knees buckled. Just for a second, but it was enough. The sack slipped, tearing open, white dust exploding into the air. The foreman shouted. Other workers stared. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't listen. Someone brought him water. Someone else slapped his back hard. "Eat something, man," they said. He nodded, embarrassed, and mumbled an apology. But inside he was panicking. If he lost this job, he'd never make the fee deadline. That night he sold his only decent shirt, the one he wore to weddings and funerals, to a neighbor for 200 rupees. He didn't tell his daughter. He just added the money to the tin and went to bed with his stomach screaming. 2 days before the deadline, he had 2,060 rupees, 40 short. He walked to the edge of the village where an old man sold firewood. He offered to chop a week's worth for free if the man would give him 40 rupees now. The old man studied him, then nodded slowly. "You look like a ghost," he said, "but I'll take your word." By sunset, his hands were bleeding, his back on fire, but he had the money. The next morning he washed his face, combed his thinning hair, and put on his patched shirt. He walked to the school, clutching the envelope with the exact amount inside. The clerk counted it twice, then stamped the receipt without looking up. He stood there for a moment, just breathing. Then he turned and walked home. His daughter was waiting at the door. "Did you pay it?" she asked, eyes wide. He nodded. She threw her arms around him.
"Thank you, Papa."
He held her tight, feeling her heartbeat against his hollow chest. In that moment, the hunger didn't matter. The pain didn't matter. None of it did, because she was still in school, still dreaming, still safe. And that was enough. Weeks turned into months and life settled into a rhythm, though it was a rhythm built on silence and empty plates. He still woke before dawn, still walked miles to whatever job he could find, and still came home with nothing but tired bones and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. But something had changed. His daughter didn't just study now, she soared. Her teachers began stopping by the house not to complain, but to praise. She solved a problem no one else in the district could, one of them said, shaking his head in wonder. She's got a mind like a scientist. He didn't understand half of what they said, but he understood the pride in their voices. And that pride somehow filled a space inside him that food never could. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, wrapped in crisp white paper, sealed with a red stamp. His daughter tore it open with trembling hands, then read it aloud, her voice rising with each sentence. A regional science competition. She'd been selected to represent the school. First place meant a full scholarship to a top boarding school in the city. Tuition, books, uniforms, even meals. Everything covered. For 6 years, he sat very still. The city, 6 years. It sounded like another world. A world he'd never seen, never dared to imagine for himself, but now, suddenly, it was being offered to her. "What do you think, Papa?" she asked, eyes shining. He swallowed. "I think you should go." But that night, alone in the dark, doubt crept in like a cold wind. The scholarship covered school costs, but not the train ticket. Not the shoes she'd need. Not the suitcase, the winter coat, the notebooks. The fine print mentioned a one-time admission kit fee, 3,500 rupees. Just to start, 3,500. He stared at the ceiling, his stomach tight. He'd barely recovered from the last payment. His body still ached from the firewood chopping. His hands still cracked in the dry heat. Where would this money come from? He didn't sleep. By morning, he'd made up his mind. The next day, he went to the small wooden box hidden behind a loose brick in the wall, the one his wife had used for her jewelry. Inside lay one thing, a thin gold bangle, slightly tarnished, with a tiny flower design. It was all she'd left behind. He'd never sold it. Never even considered it. It was her memory, her presence in their home. But now, looking at it, he saw something else, a train ticket. A school blazer. A future. He walked to the nearest town, 10 kilometers away, the bangle wrapped in a clean cloth tucked inside his shirt. At the jeweler's shop, the man weighed it, checked the purity, and offered for 200 rupees. He didn't haggle, didn't hesitate. He took the money, counted it twice, and bought everything on the school's list that very afternoon. A navy blue uniform, stiff and new. black shoes that squeaked when she walked, a sturdy suitcase with silver latches, even a small notebook with her name printed on the cover. When he came home, she gasped. "Papa, how?" "Don't worry about how," he said gently. "Just pack your things." She hugged him so tight he thought his ribs might crack, but this time it didn't hurt. It felt like hope. The day she left, the sky was clear and bright. He walked her to the railway station, carrying her suitcase like it was made of glass. Other parents were there too, fussing over their children, handing them snacks, whispering last-minute advice. He had nothing to give but his silence and his eyes, watching her, memorizing her face. The train whistle blew. She climbed aboard, then leaned out the window. "I'll write every week," she called. He nodded, unable to speak. As the train pulled away, he raised his hand, not in a wave but in a slow, steady salute. She smiled until she couldn't see him anymore. He stood there long after the tracks went quiet. Then he turned and began the long walk home. Back in the empty house, silence felt heavier than before. No books flipping, no humming while she studied, no soft footsteps at night. Just the wind through the cracks in the wall, but he didn't let himself sink. Instead, he worked harder. He took night shifts cleaning the community hall. He helped farmers harvest wheat for extra grain. He even started collecting plastic bottles from the roadside, selling them by the kilo. Every rupee went into a new tin, this one labeled "for her return." He didn't tell her any of this in his letters. His notes were short, cheerful. "The mango tree is flowering. Old man Joshi's goat had twins. Don't worry about me, I'm fine." He never mentioned the cough that wouldn't go away, or the way his vision sometimes blurred in the afternoon sun. He never said how much he missed her voice. Months passed. Then a year. Her letters came regularly, filled with stories of labs and libraries, of friends from places he'd never heard of teachers who believed in her. She sent a photo once, her in the school uniform, standing in front of a tall building with glass windows. She looked taller, confident, like someone who belonged in that world. He kept the photo tucked inside his shirt, next to his heart. Then, one monsoon afternoon, a letter arrived with urgent handwriting. She'd been accepted into a national science camp, the top 10 students in the country. But there was a problem. The camp required a deposit, 2,000 rupees. Due in 10 days, his heart sank. He'd just paid for roof repairs after the last storm. His savings were gone, but he didn't panic. Not this time. He remembered the old bicycle in the shed, rusted with a flat tire but still whole. He'd bought it years ago before his wife fell ill. He'd never sold it because it reminded him of the day they rode together through the fields, laughing like children. Now, he wheeled it out, wiped off the dust, and pushed it to the scrap dealer. 50 rupees, the man said. "Make it 100, he replied. It still got good metal. They settled on 80. Not enough, so he did something he'd never done before. He asked for help. He went to the village headman, not with a plea, but with a promise. "I'll work double hours for the next month," he said. "Just lend me 119.20 now." The headman studied him for a long time. Then he sighed. "You're a fool for love," he muttered, but he handed over the money. That night he sent the payment by money order along with a note. "Go shine." "I'll be here," she wrote back a week later. "I got in, Papa. They said I was the only one from our district. Thank you." He read that line over and over until the paper softened in his hands. Years began to blur. She moved from camp to competition, from competition to college entrance exams. Each step required something: fees, forms, travel. Each time he found a way. He sold his spare blanket. He skipped medical checkups. He ate less so she could eat more, even though she was hundreds of miles away. People in the village started talking. That man would sell his soul for his daughter, they'd say. He never corrected them. Maybe they were right. But what no one saw was the quiet joy beneath the struggle. When her school magazine arrived with her article in it, he read it under the lamp until his eyes burned. When she called from a public phone once a month, he saved up just to hear her voice, even if it was only for 2 minutes. He never told her how hard it was. Never let her feel guilty. Because in his mind this wasn't sacrifice, it was love. Plain and simple, and love didn't keep score. It just gave. So he kept giving, until his body began to whisper warnings he could no longer ignore. But even then he smiled. Because somewhere out there, in a world of books and bright lights, his daughter was becoming everything he'd ever hoped for. and that was worth every empty meal. Every aching step, every silent night, he'd do it all again, in a heartbeat. Time doesn't move in straight lines. It bends around joy, stretches through worry, and sometimes drags its feet when you're waiting for something good. For him, the years after his daughter left for the city felt like both a blur and an eternity. Every season came and went with the same quiet routine. Wake before sunrise, work until his hands shook, eat just enough to keep standing, and sleep with one ear open as if she might call in the middle of the night. He never got that call. But the letters kept coming, thin envelopes at first, then thicker ones filled with printed reports, certificates, and once, a small photograph of her standing beside a tall man in a lab coat. Her professor, she wrote. He says I have real potential, the letter said. He didn't know what potential meant exactly, but he knew it was something precious, something rare. And it was his daughter's. He kept every letter in a cloth bundle tied with string hidden under his mattress. On nights when the loneliness pressed too hard, he'd take them out, unfold the pages carefully, some now yellow at the edges, and read them again, tracing her handwriting like it was a map back to her. She wrote about classrooms with projectors, libraries taller than the banyan tree in the village square, and classmates who spoke English so fast it sounded like music. She never complained, never said she missed home, but sometimes, between the lines, he could feel it, the ache of being far away, the weight of being the only one from their kind of place in a world that moved too fast. He wanted to tell her it was okay to miss home, that it was okay to be tired, but his replies were always short, steady, full of small village news. The well had been cleaned, the postman got a new bicycle, the neighbor's cow gave birth to twins. He painted a picture of calm, of normalcy so she wouldn't worry, so she could focus on her dreams without looking back. What he didn't write about was the cough. It started as a tickle in his throat during the winter, then it deepened, turning wet and rough, especially at night. He tried home remedies, ginger with honey, turmeric milk, but nothing helped. One morning he spat into the dust and saw red, just a streak but enough to make his hands go cold. He said nothing. Not to the doctor in the next village, not to the shopkeeper who asked why he looked so pale. He couldn't afford medicine, not when her college application forms had just arrived with a list of fees that made his head spin, so he wrapped a scarf tighter around his neck, drank more salt water, and kept walking to work. His body began to betray him slowly, like a rope fraying strand by strand. His knees cracked when he squatted. His breath came short even on flat ground. Once, while carrying sacks at the grain market, he had to stop and lean against a wall, eyes closed, until the dizziness passed. The other workers exchanged glances but said nothing. They knew his story. Everyone in the village did. Still, he refused help. When the school teacher offered to organize a small collection, he shook his head firmly. "She's doing well," he said. "That's all the help I need." But pride doesn't fill an empty stomach or heal a broken lung. One evening, after a long day hauling stones for a new road, he collapsed just outside his door. Not dramatically, just sank to his knees, then sat in the dirt, too tired to move. An old woman from the next house saw him and brought water. "You're killing yourself," she said, not unkindly. He smiled weakly. "Just resting," she sighed. "Your daughter would cry if she saw you like this." That hit harder than any stone. He forced himself up, washed his face, and cooked a thin dal for dinner, though he barely tasted it. Later, by lamplight, he wrote her a letter. "All is well here," he began. "The neem tree is blooming again. Don't worry about anything. Just study hard." He didn't mention the cough. Didn't say how his ribs showed through his shirt now or how his shadow looked thinner than it used to. Months passed. Then came the biggest news yet. She'd been accepted into a top engineering college. Full scholarship again, but this time it included a monthly stipend. She was overjoyed. In her letter, she wrote, "Now I can send you money, Papa. You won't have to work so hard." His heart swelled and then sank because he knew she'd send it. And he also knew he'd never spend it on himself. When the first money order arrived, 500 rupees, he held it in his hands like it was sacred. Then he walked to the village school and handed it to the headmaster. "For books," he said. "For the children who can't afford them." The headmaster stared at him. "But this is your daughter's gift to you." He shook his head. "She gave it to me so I'd stop worrying. The best way I can stop worrying is to know other children get a chance too." He never told her what he'd done. In his next letter he wrote, I bought new shoes. I'm eating well. Don't send more. It wasn't true, but it was necessary. As the years went on, her visits home became rarer, first once a year, then only during major holidays. Each time she came, she brought gifts, a warm shawl, a pressure cooker, a small radio that played news from the capital. She'd look at him closely, frowning. "You're too thin, Papa." "I'm fine," he'd say, waving her off. "Just built this way." She'd insist on cooking, on cleaning, on taking him to the clinic. He'd go along to please her, but skip the medicine once she left. What was the point? He was old. She was young. The world belonged to her now. One winter, she called from a phone booth in the city, voice trembling. "I got an internship at a big tech company," she said. "They might hire me full-time." He closed his eyes. "That's wonderful. I'll be able to take care of you properly soon," she added softly. He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "You already have." She didn't understand. Not then. He never asked for anything. Never complained. Never let her see the nights he spent sitting up, coughing into a cloth, or the days he worked through fever because there was no one else to do it. His love wasn't loud. It didn't need applause. It lived in the space between what he gave up and what she gained, and in that space she grew. Strong, brilliant, fearless. He watched her from afar, like a gardener watching a sapling become a tree. He didn't need to stand in its shade. Just knowing it stood tall was enough. Even when his body grew weaker, even when his steps slowed to a shuffle, he never regretted a single missed meal, a single sleepless night, a single rupee spent on her instead of himself. Because every sacrifice had a purpose. Every silent ache had a name, and that name was hope. So he kept going, quietly, stubbornly, lovingly, until the day she would finally come home for good. He didn't know when that would be, but he'd be ready. Even if his bones ached and his breath came short, even if the world forgot him, she wouldn't. And that was all that mattered. The day started like any other. Gray sky, cool breeze, the distant crow of a rooster. He woke to the familiar ache in his chest, the one that never really went away anymore. He sat up slowly, rubbing his knees, and reached for the glass of water on the floor. His hands shook a little, but he managed. Outside, the village was just beginning to stir. Smoke curled from chimneys. A dog barked. Life moved on, as it always did. He didn't expect anything special. Not today. Not ever, really. He'd long stopped waiting for miracles. His miracle was already out in the world, wearing a cap and gown, walking across a stage in a city he'd only seen in photographs she'd sent. Graduation day. She'd told him about it in her last letter. "I'll call you right after," she'd written. "Don't go far from the phone booth." He'd smiled, tucked the letter away, and gone back to mending a torn fishing net for a neighbor. He wouldn't be near any phone booth, he didn't even have a phone, but he'd be listening for her voice in the wind, in the silence, in the space between heartbeats. What he didn't know was that she had other plans. Around mid-morning, as he swept the dirt courtyard with a broom made of dried palm leaves, a stranger appeared at the edge of the path, a young man in a crisp shirt holding a small suitcase. Behind him, dust rose from the road. A bus had just passed. "Is this the house of—" the young man began, then stopped, eyes widening. "You're really here." He looked up, confused. "Who's asking?" Before the man could answer, another figure stepped into view from behind the neem tree, and his breath stopped. It was her, not in a photo, not in a dream, not in a letter, but real, standing there in a simple cotton dress, hair tied back, eyes bright with tears she was trying not to shed. She dropped her bag and ran to him, barefoot on the hot earth, just like when she was a child. "Papa," she cried, throwing her arms around him. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. He just held her, his thin arms trembling, his face buried in her shoulder. She smelled like city rain and soap and something new, something confident like success. But underneath it all, she still smelled like home. "How—" he finally whispered. "I took the night bus," she said, pulling back just enough to look at him. "I wanted to surprise you." He tried to smile, but his throat was too tight. He nodded, patted her cheek, then turned quickly to hide the tears welling in his eyes. "You shouldn't have come all this way," he muttered. "Waste of money." She didn't argue. Just picked up her bag and followed him inside. The house hadn't changed much. Same cracked walls, same clay pots, same kerosene lamp on the shelf. but to her it looked smaller, frailer, and so did he. She watched him move, slow, careful, like every step cost him something. His clothes hung loose. His hands, once strong enough to carry bricks all day, now looked like dry twigs. And when he coughed, a deep rattling sound, she flinched. "Have you seen a doctor?" she asked gently that evening as they sat on the sharp boy outside. He waved a hand. Old man's cough, nothing. But she didn't believe him. The next morning, while he was out fetching water, she searched the house. In the corner behind his cot, she found a small tin. Inside were folded papers, medical bills, most of them unpaid. Dates going back years. One note from a nurse: severe malnutrition, needs rest and proper diet. Her hands shook. Then she opened the drawer of the old wooden chest. Beneath a stack of faded letters, hers was a small ledger. Page after page of neat handwriting. Day 12, skipped lunch, saved 20 rupees. Day 45, sold wife's bangle, for 200 rupees for school kit. Day 89, walked 8 kilometers, saved bus fare, 15 rupees. At the bottom of the drawer, wrapped in cloth, was a single gold bangle, tarnished but whole. The one she'd seen in old photos of her mother. She sank to the floor, sobbing. All this time she'd thought he was fine. She'd sent money, sure, but he'd never used it on himself. He'd lived on air and love, stretching every rupee until it screamed, and she'd been too busy chasing her future to see the cost of it. That afternoon she took him to the clinic in the next village. No arguments, no excuses. The doctor examined him, frowned, and said, "You should have come years ago." She stayed for a week. Cooked his meals, thick dal, soft rice, boiled eggs. Made him drink milk with turmeric every night. Sat with him under the neem tree, just talking like they used to. She told him about college, about her job offer, about how she'd been accepted into a program to build solar-powered learning centers in rural areas. He listened, eyes shining. "You're going to help others like you," he said softly. "Like us," she corrected. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the fields, she took his hand. "Papa," she said, voice steady but full of emotion, "I'm not going back to the city alone." He looked at her, confused. "I'm staying," she said. "For a while. Long enough to build something here. Something that matters," he started to protest. "Your job, your future." But she squeezed his hand. "My future started here," she said. "With you. And it's time I gave something back." He didn't argue after that. Maybe because he was tired. Maybe because, for the first time in years, he let himself be cared for. That night she made a promise. Not out loud, but deep in her heart. She wouldn't just take care of him. She'd honor everything he'd given up. Every skipped meal, every silent tear, every rupee saved while his body starved. She'd build a place where children like her, bright, hungry for knowledge, but poor in pocket, could learn without their fathers having to go hungry. And she'd start right here. As she lay awake that night, listening to his quiet breathing from the next room, she finally understood the weight of his love. It wasn't in grand speeches or big gestures. It was in empty plates, in worn-out slippers, in a father who chose hunger so his child could feast on dreams. Now, it was her turn to carry that love forward, not just for him, but for everyone who believed that a child's future was worth more than their own comfort. And she would. With everything she had. He woke to a sound he hadn't heard in years. Not the crow of a rooster or the rustle of wind through dry fields, but the low, steady hum of engines. At first he thought he was dreaming, but the noise grew louder, closer until it filled the morning air like a song he didn't recognize but somehow knew by heart. Curious, he pushed himself up from his mat, wincing slightly at the stiffness in his knees. His health had improved since his daughter came back. Better food, regular medicine, and most of all, the quiet joy of having her near again. Still, he moved slowly like a man learning to walk after a long illness. He stepped outside, blinking in the early sun, and froze. Where the dirt path used to end at his doorstep, now stood a line of vehicles, shiny cars, a white van with a logo on the side. Even a small school bus painted bright blue. Men in clean shirts stood talking to villagers. A woman with a camera adjusted her lens. Children from the neighborhood peeked from behind trees, eyes wide with wonder. He stood there in his old vest and dhoti, barefoot, confused. "What's all this?" he asked a neighbor. The man grinned. "Your daughter's big day, Bhaiya." Didn't she tell you? Before he could answer, she appeared, walking toward him from the edge of the crowd, wearing a simple salwar kameez, her hair tied back, a calm smile on her face. She didn't look like someone who'd brought all this noise to their quiet lane. She looked like the same girl who used to study under a kerosene lamp, only now her eyes held a quiet fire. "Papa," she said softly, taking his hand. "Come see." She led him past the cars, past the curious faces, to a freshly painted building just beyond their old field, the one that used to grow wheat but had lain empty for years. Now it held a single-story structure with large windows, a red-tiled roof, and a sign above the door, Shiksha Prakash Learning Center, free education for all. His breath caught. Inside, the space was bright and clean. Wooden benches, a blackboard, shelves filled with books, even a small computer corner, with 2 machines humming softly. On the wall hung a photo, him years ago standing beside a younger version of her, both smiling outside their old hut. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Dedicated to the father who went hungry so his child could learn." He turned to her, eyes wet. "You did all this?" She nodded. "With help. From people who heard our story, from the company I work for, but mostly from you." Just then, a small boy, no older than 10, ran up clutching a notebook. "Didi," he called. "Is it true we get to learn science here? Like you did?" She knelt and smiled. "Yes, and math. And English. And how to build things that help people." The boy beamed and ran off to tell his friends. That was when he understood. This wasn't just a building. It was a promise. Kept, multiplied, passed on. The crowd began to gather near the entrance. A local official gave a short speech praising her vision. Journalists asked questions. Villagers clapped, some wiping tears. But through it all, he stood quietly, watching children, boys and girls, barefoot and bright-eyed, step inside like they were entering a temple of hope. Then came the moment no one expected. One by one, the drivers of the vehicles stepped out, not as guests but as donors. The white van belonged to a book publisher who'd pledged free textbooks for 5 years. The blue bus was a gift from a transport company to pick up children from distant hamlets. Even the sleek cars carried representatives from tech firms offering free internet and training. But the real surprise came last. An elderly man in a simple white kurta walked up to him, holding a small envelope. "My grandson was in the same science camp as your daughter," he said. Because of her, he believed he could dream too. He's studying engineering now. This is for you." Inside the envelope was a check, not huge, but enough to cover medicine, food, and a new roof for years to come. He didn't take it for himself. He handed it to his daughter. "Put it in the center's fund," he whispered. She nodded, eyes shining. Later, as the crowd thinned and the sun climbed higher, he sat on a bench outside the new building, sipping sweet tea someone had brought. His daughter sat beside him, quiet for once. "You didn't have to do all this," he said finally. She looked at him. "Yes, I did." "Because you did." He didn't argue. He just watched a group of children laugh as they tried out the new blackboard, scribbling numbers and stars with chalk. One little girl turned and waved at him shyly. He waved back. In that moment, the hunger of all those years didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like seed, planted in silence, watered with sacrifice, and now, finally, blooming in the laughter of children who would never have to choose between food and books. A few days later, the vehicles were gone. The reporters had left, but the center stayed open. Every morning, children arrived, some walking miles, some riding the blue bus, all carrying dreams as big as the sky. And every morning, he sat on that same bench, not as a beggar or a hero, but as a witness. Sometimes a child would come up and ask, "Did you really not eat so your daughter could study?" He'd smile and say, "I ate plenty." I ate hope. They didn't always understand, but they'd nod anyway, then run off to class, their shoes kicking up dust on the same path he once walked empty-stomached. Now, that path led somewhere. His daughter still worked long hours, coordinating teachers, fixing the internet, writing grant proposals. But in the evenings, they'd sit together under the neem tree just like old times. Only now, instead of silence, they shared stories. Hers about the children's progress, his about the village gossip. He still woke before dawn, but now it wasn't to walk to a worksite. It was to sweep the courtyard of the learning center, to light the lamp early so students could read before school, to make sure the water pots were full. He wasn't strong like before, but he was needed, and that gave him a different kind of strength. One evening, as the sun turned the fields gold, a young boy ran up to him holding a paper. "Look, Dada, I got full marks in math." He took the paper, traced the red ink with his finger, and smiled. "You'll go far," he said. The boy grinned. "Like your daughter?" He looked toward the center where she stood talking to a group of parents, her voice calm and sure. Then he looked back at the boy. "Even farther," he said softly. And for the first time in his life, he truly believed it. Because the circle was complete. The hunger had ended, and in its place grew something that would never run out. Knowledge, shared freely like bread broken among many hands. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and listened to the sound of children learning. It was the sweetest music he'd ever heard. There was no grand plan for a sixth part. Life rarely works that way. But sometimes after a story seems to end, it keeps growing. Like a tree that sprouts new branches long after you thought it was full grown. And that's exactly what happened. A year after the Learning Center opened, something quiet but powerful began to ripple through the village. Children who once trailed behind in school were now raising their hands first. Parents who used to say books won't fill stomachs started asking how their daughters could join the coding class. Even the old men who sat under the banyan tree, chewing betel leaf and grumbling about new ways, began nodding when they saw the blue bus roll in each morning, full of kids in neat uniforms. But the real change wasn't just in grades or attendance. It was in the air, in the way hope stopped being a whisper and started sounding like a song. He noticed it one rainy afternoon. He was sitting under the center's covered veranda, mending a torn school bag when a woman he barely knew approached. She held a small girl by the hand, barefoot, hair tangled, eyes wide with shyness. "Dada," the woman said, voice trembling. "My husband says girls shouldn't study past class 5, but she loves to read. She copies letters from the shop signs onto mud with sticks." She paused, then added softly, "Can she come here? Even if we can't pay?" He looked at the girl. She didn't speak, but she held out a crumpled piece of paper, a drawing of a bird with wings made of numbers. Without a word, he stood, took the girl's hand, and led her inside. "Room 2, he told her gently. "Math class just started." The woman burst into tears. He patted her shoulder and walked back out, heart full. That day he realized the center wasn't just teaching subjects, it was changing minds. And that was harder than any brick he'd ever carried. His daughter saw it too. She began staying later, not just to teach, but to talk. To mothers worried about dowries, to fathers scared of losing farm help, to teenagers dreaming of careers no one in their family had ever imagined. She listened more than she spoke, and slowly trust grew. Then came the monsoon that nearly washed it all away. Heavy rains fell for 10 days straight. The fields flooded. The road turned to sludge. And one night, a section of the center's roof leaked badly, soaking books and short-circuiting one of the computers. He woke to the sound of his daughter moving in the dark. She was already outside, dragging a tarpaulin from the shed, trying to cover the roof with a bamboo pole. "Go back to sleep," she whispered when she saw him. But he didn't. He joined her, barefoot in the rain, holding the other end of the tarp, tying ropes with fingers stiff from cold. They worked until dawn, soaked to the bone, laughing when the wind blew the tarp over their heads like a ghost. By morning, the damage was contained. But they were exhausted. As they sat on the wet steps, sipping hot tea from a neighbor who'd seen them working, she said quietly, "I'm thinking of starting a night class for adults." He looked at her, surprised. "Adults?" "Yes, the mothers. The laborers. The ones who never got to go to school." She smiled. "If a child can learn, why not the parent?" He thought about it, then nodded. "Start with letters, then numbers, then whatever they want." The night classes began the next month. At first, only 3 people came. A widow who wanted to read medicine labels, a young man who dreamed of driving a truck but couldn't read road signs, and an old farmer who simply said, "I want to write my name before I die." But word spread. Soon 15 came, then 30. They sat on the same benches their children used by day, holding pencils like they were fragile treasures. Some cried when they wrote their first word. Others stayed late, practicing long after the lamps were lit. He started helping too. not as a teacher but as a presence. He'd sit in the back mending tools or sorting books, just so they knew someone believed in them. One evening, the old farmer stood up, shaky but proud, and wrote his full name on the board. Slow, careful, perfect. The room erupted in applause. The man turned to him, eyes glistening. "My father never held a pen," he said. "My son will hold a degree." That night, walking home under a sky full of stars, his daughter said, "You know, Papa, this feels bigger than I ever planned." He smiled. The best things usually are. Then something unexpected happened. A group of students from the city, college kids doing a rural outreach project, visited the center. They filmed a short video, children solving puzzles, adults reading aloud, him sweeping the courtyard with his old broom. They posted it online with a simple caption, "One father's hunger fed a whole village's future." Within days, the video went viral, not in a flashy, celebrity way, but in a quiet, human way that reached teachers, donors, even government officials. Messages poured in, offers of help, invitations to speak, a National Education Award nomination. He refused most of it. "I didn't do anything special," he'd say. "I just loved my child."